Lending earnest money does not always go to plan. In fact, sometimes it downright sucks. And because people are not good at explaining the downsides of what they're doing, and I'm certainly to blame with that as well, I wanted to dedicate an entire video today to talking to you guys about 3 different things that nobody else tells you about the downsides of lending so that you go in with proper expectations and can focus on making more money. Let's talk about it. Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name's Ryan, and if you're new here, I'm just a guy that stumbled upon this whole lending money thing and somehow figured out how to at least make it semi-profitable. And I want to spend the time today to talk about some of the things that I've experienced that have been not so fun and not so profitable so that you have a better understanding of the entirety of lending and not just the fun parts, because that's not how life works. So I'm going to be going over 3 things today that I've learned that nobody told me when I was getting into lending, so that hopefully you watch this video and you can say somebody did tell you. So the first thing with lending, and probably the biggest one, although these are all great ones, all things that happen all the time, but the first one is that not all deals end up closing. Shocker, I know. And if you're new to real estate, maybe that is actually a surprise, because when I was getting into wholesaling, I can tell you, I thought everything just went super smoothly. It seemed like that from the outside. I thought it just went according to plan. And, you know, if there was a closing date on there, that it would just close on that date, which if you know, you know, it never does, right? Well, guess what? When you're lending, you're working with wholesalers. So turns out that those 2 things coincide. And so the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that not all deals go through and how I handle that, and also just how that works in general. So if you are lending specifically to wholesalers, they're going to be going out and getting this contract using you to lend the earnest money for the contract to hold on to it. And then they're going to go try and find a buyer. And the more people you work with, the more buyers are going to get found, but also the more deals that are going to fall through, right? And so when you think about it, if they go out and they don't find a buyer, then that deal is not going to go through and you're not going to make money. Now, yes, there are ways to mitigate that, right? You can charge an upfront fee or something like that, but the point is, if you go lend on a deal and you expect to make $2,000 profit, don't be like that person that goes out and spends the money before it comes in, right? Because there's a good chance that you're not going to get that money back. I can't give an exact percentage. I think it's different for everybody, and it really totally depends on what type of deal you're lending on, what type of people you work with, your experience level. But in my experience, anywhere from 30 to 40% of the deals that I lend on don't close. And I would expect the average to probably be more like 50% for the average person. Obviously, it totally depends, but it's a pretty dang high percentage, right? It's like basically 1 in every 2 deals is not going to close. And nobody told me that when I was getting started. And the worst part about it is that, you know, you don't lend on a deal and then the next day they're like, oh, it's not going to close. No, it's like, you lend on the deal and you wait like 2 or 3 weeks and then the deal doesn't close. Okay? So it's not exactly sunshines and rainbows. It's pretty annoying. It's pretty frustrating when this happens. And so that's something that you have to deal with. And, you know, like I said, you can mitigate this stuff for sure, but you have to understand that when you are lending on these deals, the biggest win, in my opinion, in my books, and the way that I operate, is that the biggest win is that you lend money, and if the deal doesn't close, you just get it back, right? It sounds pretty lame, but if you can lend that money, get it back, you don't lose the money. Yes, you didn't make money, but obviously you didn't lose all of the money. And so technically, I would count that as a win. Now, obviously, it's not a closed deal, but still a win in my book. So that's the first thing. These deals just do not go according to plan oftentimes. And that's why I've started to transition into other types of lending. And, you know, I'll say other people that I work with that do a lot of this stuff have also started to transition into other types of lending, because it would be stupid, it would be technically insane to keep lending on the same things if they're not working and just keep doing it over and over and expect something to change. So for me, if I expect something to change, then I have to change my approach. I have to change the people I work with, the people I talk to. Otherwise, the statistics are likely going to be the statistics. So I work on now focusing on how can I work with better wholesalers? How can I work on deals that close more consistently? For example, if a single family wholesale deal only closes 50% of the time, but a multifamily or a commercial deal closes 80% of the time, totally making these numbers up, by the way, but let's say that was the case, then maybe I would transition into those other deals that have a higher close rate, right? So that I can expect a higher close rate. Makes sense. These are the types of things that I do where I'm analyzing my deals and not just accepting them as law necessarily, although it's good to accept on the front end that potentially this could happen, but actually working on how can we iterate and make these things better so that we can make more money, other people can make more money, and I don't keep getting stuck holding the bag, right? So that's the first thing. I want you guys to really let that one sink in because I'd say it's probably the biggest one. Now, the next one I kind of alluded to in that point, but I want to make a whole separate point on it so that you can understand deals do not close on time. That is a fact. I will define that as a fact because when I started wholesaling, like I said, I thought every deal closed on close of escrow. I quite literally, I'm not making this up. We wholesaled 20 deals, I think, last year. We never had a single deal close on time. A single one of them. That's how bad it is, right? Now, we probably just sucked, and you can tell us that we sucked and other people do better. Sure, that's fine. But the point is, I've now experienced wholesaling myself and obviously lending on a ton of deals, and I know that these deals do not close on time. And so when you are lending this money, it's kind of a give and take on, if the deal is supposed to close on this date, well, what happens when it doesn't? Because it won't, right? Are you going to charge extra fees? And if so, at what point are you going to start charging them? What are those fees going to look like? Because the reality is you can't look on your schedule and say, oh, I'm going to get that money back with the return on, on next Friday, for example. No, you won't. It's not going to happen. So are you going to prepare for that? Or are you going to be sitting there saying, oh, I had another deal lined up, thought the money was going to come back, didn't come back, now I'm screwed. Don't put yourself in that situation. Expect the worst, expect the unexpected with these things because they will continue to get extended. It's just how life goes. And you have to be able to operate off of that, whether that means that you get more funds from other places, right? You work with other people, but you can't be operating in a system that's constrained by other deals, if that makes sense. Like that's not how you're going to scale and be successful because if you're constraining yourself by a certain amount of money or a certain other deal, you're going to use that as an excuse to not continue making progress with your business. And I don't want to see you do that. And I know for a fact that it is not the best way to do it because, again, you're going to slow your roll. And we don't want to be slowing your roll. We want to be making progress. So understand these deals are not going to close on time. Even if we get past hurdle number 1, which is the deal not closing at all, there's going to be so many complications, and I could list them on for days. But usually it's something like a title complication, a lien comes up, right? Seller or buyer can't get their funds in order in time. There's a million different things that happen, and it seems like it's a little bit different every time. But the result is the same, which is that the deal gets pushed back. And so if I was to give a tip, a recommendation on these things, it's the same one I talk about all the time, which is just to keep that level of communication high, right? If you keep that level of communication high, yes, it's frustrating. Obviously, we want deals to close on time. Shoot, I want deals to close early, right? But it's not necessarily going to happen. And so if we keep that open line of communication, say, hey, are things on track? Are things on track? Even up until the day of closing. Because even, day of closing, I'd say is probably the time where everybody gets there and thinks it's going to close. And then that's when something pops up. So if you have that open line of communication, you can at least have an understanding, hey, I get it's not going to close today. What is the status? Talk with the title company, talk with the wholesaler, the buyer, whoever it is, and understand, okay, what's our next expectation, right? Is the lender holding it up? If they are, that stuff usually takes forever. If it's an attorney holding it up, that stuff usually takes forever. There's going to be a lot of different things that can go on here. So we have to understand that and just accept it and move on and make sure that we're operating in a sense that's going to allow us to be successful regardless. Now, the last one is big time. And I'm just going to lay it out here and then I'll talk about it. So the third point is that your money is never 100% protected. Nobody tells you this. I've never heard anybody talk about this. And so I'm going to break it down for you right now. Here's the thing. A lot of people are told if you lend money for a wholesaler, once a buyer comes in and puts their earnest money in, your money is now protected. I disagree. Your money is more protected, definitely, but it is not fully protected and it never will be. And that's why my point is that your money is never 100% protected until it lands back in your account. That's the only time that your money is fully protected. And here's why. And I'll give you an example. I'll give you a story because I don't make this stuff up. I only talk about what I've experienced, right? So we had a deal recently where I lent the money and the money went into escrow and then they found a buyer. And the buyer put their money into escrow. So naturally I thought, cool, I put $2,000 in, the buyer put $5,000 in, their money protects my money. Now if something were to go bad, right, which happens, my money would get lost to the seller, but the buyer's money would get lost to me. So I would be protected, right? My money would not go nowhere. It would come back. You get what I'm saying? So what happened was the deal did go bad. the buyer decided, I'm going to back out. They made up some dumb excuse. Welcome to the land of buyers. Shout out to the buyers that make dumb excuses. And this buyer, of course, had an attorney ready because turns out they do this all the time. Again, big shocker. People aren't always the best. So this buyer comes in and says, I'm going to back out. And even though I signed a contract saying that my money is non-refundable, I'm going to refute that and I'm going to bring an attorney in and I'm going to make up some excuses or whatever about why I should get the money back. Now, here's what happens here. There's basically two roads that can happen. The first one is that you come to an agreement and settle beforehand on what to do. The second is that you bring attorneys in, you go to court, and it potentially takes forever to get the money. And you can pick either of those two options. But what I want to bring up with this point is that if that is the case, you now are potentially going to lose that money back to the buyer, and that means your money is now exposed again. And so if this buyer backs out after the inspection period, which they probably will, knowing the timeline and the fact that the buyer usually comes in and, goes past that inspection, your money is now lost legally to the seller, and you could obviously argue that with them. Well, it's not fair, bring an attorney in, whatever. But contractually, your money is lost. And then the money that is owed to you, although it may not technically be lost, could get held up, could end up in court, whatever, end up with attorneys, all this garbage. And so the point of all this is saying that when a buyer puts in their money, until that money goes into your account, until the deal closes or whatever else, there is no guarantee that that money is going to be yours. And I wanted to put that out there with an example so that people understood specifically why their money is never 100% protected. And of course, this is why I always say, do not lend money you can't lose. It's just the way it works. That's why returns are higher with this short-term stuff. It's why not everybody does it. It's not easy. Yes, you can make it work. You can mitigate risk. I talk about all that stuff all the time. But at the end of the day, I want to put out there as clear as possible that this money can and will at some point be lost. And if you're willing to understand that and accept that, you're going to get a lot further and you're going to be able to mentally handle this stuff a lot better. So that's the three things that I want to talk about in this video. As always, I like to keep it clear and concise. I hope you guys can watch and rewatch this and understand the realities of lending money so that you can go forward, operate in a way that is understanding of some of the downsides so that you can focus not just on the downsides, but on the entire picture. I'm excited to talk to you guys more about everything I'm working on and what's coming up. I hope you learned something today. If you did, leave a comment on other things that you're looking to hear from, questions that you have or anything like that. I love to answer them, and I hope to make more content that helps you guys in the future. I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.